Hi, welcome to season 2 of Fractional CMOs and the 90-Day Win. I'm Dean Wang. This season, we're going to talk through some scenarios that companies in these CMOs experience to share lessons learned and tips on how to get the most out of a fractional CMO that you've hired. So, hi, Brent.
Hi there, Dean. How are you?
Good, thanks. Okay, Brent. So, standard first hypothetical. You just signed a 1-year engagement as a fractional CMO. Today's day 1. We're going to talk about the first 90 days. What problem do you normally encounter, like right from the jump when you start with a new engagement? Or what problem do you go looking for because you know it's there, even if the customer doesn't know it's there yet?
Dean.
I'm sorry, but let everyone know who you are. I should have said
that. Okay, sure, Dean. We'll start with that. My name is Brent Wees, and I'm the founder of Idea Meet Plan. I am a longtime agency guy. That's where I got my start. Was a partner in an agency called Dashboard in Toronto, Ontario, and we then evolved that into a software incubator. Created a lot of niche software for the automotive industry, and were fortunate enough to exit in 2016. And since then, I've been doing fractional work for numerous different tech companies, and also doing light fractional work for those that are in their first stages of entrepreneurial work as startup creators. And I do a little bit of executive coaching, and I also have the good fortune of traveling around the globe and speaking on a bunch of different topics.
So what problem do you go after first?
Very first problem, and I love the question, Dean, when you sent it over, and I was thinking about it again last night. It's always the same for me, based on the tech companies I'm working with and being a marketer, is the first problem I look for, or the first thing I look to assess, is their linear strategic process for their marketing. And what I mean by that, and a lot of those who are listening will probably understand this, but many of these companies just have a marketing person or a small team or external providers that they just dump asks onto. Right. And because of the size of some of the tech companies I worked for, and they are still, I would say, in their infancies, there is a propensity to just ask and walk away and leave those teams to their own devices. When I come in, the first thing I look for is, are they writing briefs around the ask? Are they taking those briefs with the stakeholders who are asking for that and doing proper reviews of that? So these are the things I look for. Are briefs being done? Is that being then moved into brainstorming with those stakeholders, with all the necessary parties? Production schedules being developed, mapped out the right way, and then that's going to market properly. Every single company I've ever worked for, this is all new territory for them. They're very welcoming of it, but it is a very big, I just don't want to call it a problem. I just think it's something if they don't know about it, they're not going to do it. So coming in, the first thing I ask is, walk me through your marketing process. How are things asked for? How are things delivered? And then from there, you can easily see all the gaps.
I want to roll right into another question. But before that, every time, understanding that most of our audience is not in marketing. Most of them are CEOs or board members or management folks who are looking at, or exploring explain to them what a brief is. Like, I came from the project management and software world, so we have an equivalent term, but explain what the brief is.
So in the most simplest of terms, if a CEO comes to me and says, Brent, we have a new product we're bringing to market. We're 2 quarters away from doing it, but we need to start thinking about a go-to-market strategy on how to promote that product or a new release on our platform. I would sit down with them and almost interview style take them through a deliberate intake of certain questions about competitive like what is the competitive nature of your market right now? Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? What are your personas? So I take them through an intake of specific questions that we can then turn into a proper document that outlines what they've asked for, but then all of the different nuance of the subject matter experts in the company and what they're lending to this. Because once we get that, then so the brief is that document that is, to back up, the brief is the document that is the foundation behind everything that gets done after that.
Right. So before the map, you have to look at the ground.
Before the map, before brainstorms. And while things are in production, the brief is an important document because you could be 2 stages out in your marketing or strategic process, and someone maybe on the executive or from leadership may have a new idea that they want to insert into that project while its development is already well into progress. You could be at the 11th hour, and a lot of us understand this, where that scope creep can come in. The brief is a necessary document because you can always just remind all the stakeholders, don't forget, this is what we've agreed on for this project. Once we get this done, then we can take that new idea and put it into the next brief and the next phase of the strategy. Yeah. So that's why I always like it, because it's just a good accountability tool for everyone working on the project.
Yeah. In project management, we used to call, I'm in a copywriting world now for many years, but back in project management, we would call it we talk about the scope. We would talk about the
scope
specs,
of work.
Right? And sort of the trio of three things would be the scope, the specs, and the thrash, which is to say, if you're going to thrash around, if you're going to explore avenues, if you're going to think, oh, it should have 5 wheels instead of 3, all that stuff is cheap and easy if you do it at the very beginning when it's just on paper. It becomes enormously expensive if you're 4 months in or 2 years in, and someone says, hey, we should refigure the entire factory for 5-wheel vehicles instead of 3-wheel vehicles. I'm like, well, it's kind of late now, man. It's cheaper to just start over than to do that. So yeah.
And I love that you included, and thanks for mentioning it too, working with project managers and in our agency days, but the specs are really important in those briefs, right? Like, what channels are we going to? Like, what are the nuance of digital and traditional channels that we may need to go into with our marketing and with our strategy? And it's really important to load that. And my old business partner, Barry Hillier, always said, like, the more thorough and broad that scope document is, the less issue you will run into as you move through to get to market.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, so let me ask another question. Every season we have a core set of 5 questions that they don't change from episode to episode. One of the reasons for that is to make it as easy as possible for the management and board and CEO folks to basically, scrub through and compare episode to episode, CMO to CMO, and see who might be a best fit for them. And so the only question that survived from question 1 to season 1 to season 2 is this one, but I had to put in a caveat because everyone used to say they need to share the information, Dean. They need to open up to us. So besides opening up to you, what should a CEO do to get maximum value out of a fractional CMO that they hired? Or if you like answering it this way, how do companies hire CMOs and then waste the money that they spent on them?
Yeah, and I can see why that question is hanging around and sticking around. It's a great question, and I'll answer the back of it first. If you want to waste your money, bring in a fractional CMO or a fractional C-suite person, regardless, and then don't engage them anymore, right? So why, so sharing information is important, but
leave them
as
in
you
a
and I both
silo.
know, in a silo. But I could share information with you now, Dean, and send you an email. Here's some information, Dean, and there's nothing, and I have to temper this the right way. There's nothing I love more than a forwarded email with "see below," right? And so when you ask that question about what is sharing information is 100 miles wide and an inch deep. So I think that sharing information is critical. But as I said earlier, when I get into this process with the executive, I find that and again, I get to work with some really interesting companies where the CEO is also the founder. So they've either built their platform or they've built their product from the ground up. Like they were working with their teams to get it to market. And some of those companies that I work with those CEOs are still those people. They haven't exited. They haven't, someone hasn't been inserted. So I find that in those situations, the CEO is the best subject matter expert. I'll let you hit the cough button there. The CEO is the best subject matter expert inside the company to walk any team through why they're doing what they're doing, how they built it. And when I looked at that question, Dean, I was thinking about a client of mine who I've worked with now for years. And what's really beneficial is when we go into brainstorms, when we have our regular weekly creative meetings around a project, when we're working with him, he's at those meetings. He's brainstorming with us. We're laughing about things. We're throwing around ideas, but
Right.
junior team members and mid-tier members and even external like services that may come in on that, they also get that time with him to really learn about how he thinks about his business,
Right.
what it's really supposed to do. And I always feel that if the CEO is that entrenched in what the company's doing, they're of massive benefit to everyone inside. But I get it too that a CEO has a whole world of chaos that we don't have to live in.
Yeah.
But if they can make time to be a part of the creative side of marketing and bring their, I find a lot of CEOs really do like that. But if you're going to be so busy that I'm here to just do things for you, and I can,
Right.
but we're going to, it's almost like a glass ceiling of ideas. We're only going to go so far without their big brain in the room.
Okay, so let's switch over and we'll say it's not you, but a friend or a peer became a fractional CMO, just signed their first ever 1-year engagement. They're about to walk into this company, new client, and they want your sort of 1 or 2 main takeaways or pieces of advice or warnings because there's already a marketing team in place. There's no leadership for marketing, but there's all the junior and mid-level people, or at least there are junior and mid-level folks on a marketing team there already. So what's your sort of like main advice to a fractional CMO who's walking into a ready-made team?
The first
Don't
thing
do
I would
this, or always do this.
always do this. Well, I will say this: that you will encounter if the team is if there's a team in place but no leadership,
Yeah.
you will encounter a sense of relief from some
Mm-hmm.
and a sense of dread from others. And when I say to both of those, the ones that are looking at that with a bit of dread and oh no, someone's going to come, they get really tight. I say you will have people that will have a tough time letting go of the way they're doing things or what they're working on or what they're sharing because they're fearful that my entry into that company or your entry into that company as the new
Yeah.
fractional CMO is going to impact potentially their employment. And I understand that anytime any executive comes in, right, there's always
Right.
that era of change. The other side of that is that there will be people that there will be this sigh of relief because finally there's someone that has the acumen and the seniority and the experience to come in and help because
Right.
they really like their jobs and they're really good at their jobs, but they are rudderless and they know it. So it's this blend of, so the first thing I'd say to someone is you're going to walk into different emotional states and you have to walk through that. The other thing I would say to them is always do this. Always explain the fractional system to them.
Right.
Explain how much you're actually there. And then the other thing I would do is to make sure you ask them, how can I help you? How can I be of service to you? How can I come in with what I'm going to impart with you and what I'm going to learn about you? But then once I do that, where are the places that I can really be of service to you? And I think that removes for anyone coming in a bit of the hesitancy of some teams.
Okay.
The
So
other thing,
yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
go ahead. Oh, I
I
was
was
just
gonna.
going to say the last thing I would say is coming in though to any place with an inbound team is
Right.
always ensure that you have a full roster of who's inside and potentially who's outside. Because as you and I both know, there
Mm,
are internal and external teams.
yeah.
So I would say to someone, make sure you get a thorough list of all parties internally and externally that are adding to the current marketing mix. And then also ask for all current budgeting.
So what if let's come at it from sort of
Mm.
a different angle. You or a mid-level person on the marketing team, and the words come down, a fractional CMO has been hired, right? So you went Google to look what a fractional CMO is, and now you think you know. And so like that person's going to start tomorrow. Okay. Tomorrow's their first day. What moves or changes or activities should you do in advance of possibly meeting that person, sometime next week? when, let's say it's Sunday, so this coming week, what should you be doing or preparing for or thinking about now that A, a CMO has been hired, but B, it's a fractional CMO?
So the question is what the staff should be doing.
As the employee, like
As the
what moves
employee,
should you
yes.
make career-wise, job-wise, expectation-wise? What should you be doing or thinking about?
Well, first off, I wouldn't career-wise, if you're an employee that hears about a fractional person coming in, I would say make sure you're prepared to walk them through everything that you're responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
Give them the full picture of what your day, your week, your month looks like, and how you are getting things in. I would also, if you were astute, I would prepare the current year's body of work, the different assets that are going out, the different things that have been designed. I would also prepare, like we said before, like a thorough list of what, and a tactful list of pros and cons, because that's what I'm going to ask that employee as well. What's working really well? What do you think where do you think improvement could be like, where do you think improvement can happen? I think that's really smart of someone. If you are, though, an employee somewhere, and again, I don't want to lean into the negative, but if the situation is very broken and there are people in there that are kind of already halfway out the door, and you're not, if you've already been looking and they're starting to bring in fractional people, sometimes that's because inside is a little broken. And I have been brought in to assess internal and external teams and make recommendations for who stays and who goes. Most times I come in, I'm just working with the suppliers, and I have clients where I'm working with all the existing internal teams and suppliers they've worked with all along. I'm just aligning process a lot better, and working with the C-suite to make sure that they're doing, how I can be of service to them. However, there are those situations where if a fractional CMO is coming in and if you're really taking an honest look at yourself and going, I'm not happy here, we're not really putting in our best efforts, then maybe you want to assess either the crossroads you are at is going, this could be an opportunity to improve things and work with someone that could radically change how we do things. But then the other side of it is maybe it's time to dust off that resume. And maybe reach out to you, Dean, and get them to do some writing for you to get them
It's been a long time since I wrote anyone's resume. Although I take that back. As a favor to a friend, there was an interim CMO, like fractional interim CMO, at the end of last year, and wanted to be hired as the full-time CMO now that the company was doing it. And that person, because that person was a really huge company, like global company, payments company, and because her mentor and coach was my client, I went ahead. So that was the first resume I'd worked on in quite a long time, but and got the job. So maybe there's a thing there. I don't know. Okay, so one other thing I want to bring up that someone else had mentioned in an earlier one is something that I hadn't thought about before. Is when you're on a marketing team, or maybe any team, but certainly marketing, where there's no marketing leader in place. One of the things this person said is, one of the things I ask people when I'm coming in to and talking to people that are already, I says, who thinks they're your boss? Because a lot of times other departments, it's like sales will come in and say, hey, we need an ad to do this, or we need change on the website to do that, right?
Yeah.
And they're giving them directions, but it's not even a dotted line, right? It's just that there's no one to say no on their behalf. And now when the fractional CMO comes in, it's like, well, now there's I have one manager, I have one boss now, instead of having to answer to a bunch of people who aren't even in my department. So I thought that was funny.
That goes back to when I said there's a sense of relief sometimes when you do come in, because that's
clarity at last.
Oh my goodness. Most of the time that department is just a dumping ground for asks. I will read the subject line of an email I got last night from a C-suite sales and a client of mine. I want to market this as soon as we have the time to get it out into the market.
Okay.
That's what these departments get when there's no one sort of defending the office, right? And so what I say to those people is, you're going to go back into your project management system where the rest of the company is working.
Yeah.
And you're going to put the asks in. Like, so when I come in and I establish things, I do ask, like, what are you managing your projects out of? How are you, how are you documenting? How are you doing these things? And there are some C-suite that do a great job of using the software that they mandate their entire organization to use.
Hmm.
And then in this case, I have a C-suite individual who's very good at their job, but they don't touch the technology that the rest of the company is
Right.
mandated to use. So there's this just fire hose of stuff. And I just push that back and I go, I need you to define what you're asking for. I need you to document it. You can send it to me, and then I'll figure out what and
Right.
when we're going
Translate
to
it.
do about
Mm.
it. But everything, big or small, has the exact same process. We will brief it.
Mm.
We will sit down at one of our standing meetings, or we'll schedule a meeting to brainstorm it. And then we'll put a production schedule that we will keep everyone accountable to. But if your lack of organization isn't our problem to solve, but we can help you get to market. If you're mindful enough to come to us with the right kind of asks, then we will be mindful enough to make
Yeah.
sure that we deliver exactly what you need and make you look great.
So, last question before we wrap up. So, I'm a CEO and I've never hired a fractional CMO before. Okay.
Hmm.
Maybe like my company's never had anything beyond a director of marketing, for instance, right? Or a manager, not a leader. Should I be looking at, or in what scenarios would I look at a fractional CMO engagement as a sprint versus a marathon? Like something that's like strongly defined endpoint, and then by that point we should have like figured out a permanent position CMO or whatever, or just re-upping, or versus this is going to be a quasi permanent thing, X number of hours per week, days per month, whatever, into the future until something really different happens. Who does best on marathons and who does best on sprints company wise?
I think it's a bit of a hybrid, Dean.
Yeah.
And I'll say it this way: I have clients that I always start when I'm approached by a client. The early proposal goes back to them as a 90-day assessment period. There's a specific ask that you need. You want me to come in and work with you. I'll put together a 90-day plan and proposal to get, like a master marketing strategy in place,
Right.
assessments in place of what's going on. And that first 90 days is also to make sure there's an actual fit. So the only time I'll sprint is on that 90 days. I will go in and go, let me do the assessments for you. Let's do some like master strategic briefing for,
Mm-hmm.
the company as a whole. It could be like a brand briefing exercise too, if there's a rebrand going on, to just get them to have that to deliver to agencies or other parties that they're working with. But most of my clients are actually long tail, month over
Marathons.
month, yearly marathons where it's like, yes, like Dean, you get 16 hours a week from me, or this
Mm-hmm.
company gets 8, or whatever that looks like. Most of the companies are in a marathon. I do have hybrid clients. Like, I have clients that we get together once a year and maybe work for 5 or 6 months on a large project, and then I back out again because they just have a different way of operating.
Interesting. All
And
right.
yeah, it's fantastic. It's a lovely client, and every year at the same time of year we get together as they work a marketing program, a strategy towards a huge national convention that they're involved with.
Right.
They don't do a ton of marketing, but this is that time of year where they pour a lot of effort, resources, and time into that. So those are fun because we get to kind of re-engage with a client we like. I have a couple of people on my team that I pull in external people, of course, and depending on the model. But it's always something that every 6 months we reconnect with this client and work with them. So, but most of the clients that I do work with are month over month. Like I said, I don't know if sprints make sense for a fractional person, because again, like the only time I've been in a window where it was we knew we had an open and close. Like I've had the good fortune of most of the clients I work with. We get into a cadence. It
Right. Yeah.
financially makes sense for them to have a fractional person rather than take on bloat salary. But there's been a few times where it's like, can you come in for a year and a half? Can you come in for 2 years while we build a marketing department, while we build our processes, external departments, and then can you be a part of the the hiring of the leadership of that new entity, and then I pull myself out.
Right. All right.
So I think true sprints of a month here, 2 months there. The only thing I'll do with that personally is work with C-suite that just need me in the room for a couple hours every
Right.
2 weeks for a sounding board. Sprinting otherwise for me, I would just point them at Fiverr.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
Fair
you
enough.
need something done in an hour, you'll find somebody. But
Yeah.
I try to build a relationship because I think that we need time and mindful time to do some deep work and have the right conversations to understand the true need.
Mm. Well, I assume you can get a fractional CMO from Fiverr. I think you might.
I
One thing that surprised me was
I have a
yesterday I
feeling
was
that
on a
yes, you
discovery
can.
call. Right.
Yes.
All of my clients have to go through this like workshop process because I need a very specific perspective of a stranger looking at this client because I'm talking to that stranger. Right. I write the first thing a prospect ever sees, and so everyone has to go through this sort of workshop with a bunch of kind of like weirdo questions that I need answered that they probably never asked before. And and this is a huge enterprise software company, like huge. I bet like $1 million would be a tiny, tiny deal for any customer that they've like brought on board. Very small. And so they're gigantic and global. And the fractional CMO, I'm normally like brought in by a fractional CMO. Or an ad agency, one or the other. And as it came out, they sort of like went into this discussion about like contracting rates and this kind of stuff. And it turns out the fractional CMO they had hired from Upwork. I said, well, that's interesting. Like, I guess why not? It's just a platform for finding people like anything else. But yeah, it's just like they found her through Upwork. I thought that was kind of great. So there you go.
I think if you've got the acumen, like if you've posted up
Yeah.
on Upwork and you got a body of work and a CV that
Mm-hmm.
matches what a company needs, there's no harm and no foul in that. I just
No.
think I wouldn't be going out like if for instance, I have a client that needed some spot work done
Mm-hmm.
because her team is just they're maxed out. And so I directed her at some external resources that I use for different things if I have to, and said, like, here, I'll tee up introductions to do spot work because I think sometimes that's where a fractional can be
Right.
beneficial to just relationship
Yeah.
building by going, don't don't spend big dollars when you just need 3 weeks of coverage to get
Mm-hmm.
through a rough spot where you're really packed up. So because again, like I said, it could be a simple ask of a drip email campaign of
Yeah.
creative and copy. You just get the right talent in if you're overloaded.
She was
Don't
the
don't pull a fractional
second
in.
fractional CMO that I'd ever encountered. We had a guest on the podcast a couple of months ago. 100% of his work comes from Upwork. It's just like how he does it. He said it took like 2 years to ramp up and get established there, but now he has inbound requests all the time, and he just chooses what he wants to like go for. So like anything, pros and cons, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it. Who should be contacting you, Brent, and how should they contact
Don't contact me if you're just trying to sell me business leads, a la LinkedIn. I
Well, I
don't
mean, as
need
a client, who should contact you?
it. I really like working with young companies. I've had the good fortune of being a partner at a full scale tier one global advertising agency. I've had the good fortune of incubating software and developing that. So I'm really interested in working with young companies that need some structure, need maybe someone of my age and time in
Right. Yeah.
to help them out. I think that's where I'm most useful. But again, I've gone in and worked with companies. It's really like you said before. There's a discovery call.
Mhm.
There's some workshopping that gets done. I've worked for like student transportation companies that are hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue every year, and that's again, it's a completely different vibe than working in the startup lane and the kinetic energy that brings. So anyone that's looking for a fractional CMO, I always say by all means please reach out, and I'll always take a call. I'll always assess a project because if it's not necessarily meant for me, there's plenty of people that I know that I could also
Yeah.
recommend them to. So I don't turn away any meetings, but it doesn't always
And,
mean that I'm going to take the work.
and how
Like you
should they
said, there's
contact
just
you?
the best way to contact me is you can always find me on LinkedIn. Very easy to find on LinkedIn. Just look me up,
Hmm.
Brent Wees, or you can get a hold of me at Brent at ideameetplan.com.
All right. All right. Thanks, Brent. This has been great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks for having me on. I really
Oh,
appreciate it as well.
it was a great talk. Thanks, everyone. See you in the next episode.